Imagine this. You walk into a room where everything looks calm on the surface. She's sitting quietly, maybe folding laundry, scrolling through her phone, or sipping tea. Nothing unusual. You ask, "Is everything okay?" She looks up, smiles faintly, and says, "I'm fine." But something in the tone, the pause before the answer, the way her eyes didn't quite meet yours, makes your stomach twist. Because you know she's not fine. Not even close. And yet, she told you she was. So you sit with this silent weight between you. Her storm, wordless but palpable. Your confusion, dense and growing. And you wonder, why can't she just say what she means? Here lies one of the great paradoxes of human connection. Women often speak indirectly, emotionally, symbolically. Men, on the other hand, are conditioned to value clarity, directness, problem-solving. Most men don't realize that a woman can say, "Nothing's wrong," and actually be communicating everything that's wrong. That "do whatever you want" doesn't mean she wants you to do it. That her silence isn't emptiness, it's a carefully layered sentence filled with context, history, expectation, fear, and hope. But instead of leaning in, most of us retreat. We either get defensive or confused, and in doing so, we miss the language beneath the language. We miss her. So here's the question that haunts me, and maybe it haunts you too. What if the problem isn't that women are too indirect? What if the problem is we were never taught how to hear them? What if male logic, in all its precision and reason, has a blind spot? A space where emotional complexity lives, and we were never handed the tools to navigate it. This isn't just about relationships. It's about a much deeper disconnection, one that touches the very core of how men and women understand each other, and how easily that understanding can be fractured. So before we roll our eyes at the next "I'm fine," before we dismiss her tears as irrational or dramatic, before we throw up our hands and call her impossible to understand, we have to ask, what if she's not being vague? What if she's just speaking in a language that no one ever taught us to translate? Because once you understand the deeper patterns, the psychology, the symbolism, the emotional architecture of her words, you'll realize she's not hiding, she's revealing, but only to the man who knows how to listen. You see, this isn't just about words. It never was. It's about meaning, how it's formed, how it's shared, and how easily it can be lost in translation between the masculine and the feminine psyche. For most men, communication is transactional. A statement equals information. A question seeks an answer. A problem demands a solution. We're wired from an early age to approach language like architecture, solid, structured, and explicit. But for women, communication is more like poetry, fluid, atmospheric, filled with emotional subtext. It's not about what is said, but how it's said, why it's said, and what remains unsaid. This isn't a flaw in either system. It's a reflection of two psychological ecosystems shaped by biology, culture, and generations of survival. Carl Jung believed that within every man exists an unconscious feminine side, the anima, and within every woman, an unconscious masculine side, the animus. When these elements remain unacknowledged, communication becomes fractured. Men, divorced from their own sensitivity, fail to recognize it in women. Women, disconnected from directness, may struggle to bridge the gap. This gap is not new. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "We rarely think deeply except under the pressure of pain." And this miscommunication, it hurts, because when a man doesn't understand a woman's emotional signals, he feels inadequate, even rejected. And when a woman doesn't feel emotionally received, she feels invisible, or worse, dismissed. So where does this invisible chasm come from? Part of it is cultural conditioning. Boys are told, "Don't cry, don't talk too much, don't be so sensitive." They grow up believing emotions are obstacles to be conquered, not languages to be learned. Meanwhile, girls are encouraged to be intuitive, relational, attuned to nuance. They're often socialized to prioritize harmony over confrontation. So they soften their truths. They imply instead of declaring. They wait to be felt instead of forcing themselves to be heard. This results in two completely different communication landscapes. One is literal, the other is symbolic. Nietzsche once warned that those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. And that's exactly what happens when men misread women. Not because women are chaotic or cryptic, but because they're playing music we were never trained to hear. This isn't just about romance. It plays out in boardrooms, friendships, even between mothers and sons. Misreading emotional nuance leads to resentment, disconnection, and often unnecessary conflict. But the tragedy is deeper than that. When men continue to ignore this dimension, they risk losing access to their own anima, the very gateway to emotional wisdom, empathy, and relational intelligence. And when that happens, conversations become battles, curiosity dies, love becomes negotiation. So no, it's not that she's being too emotional. It's that we've gone emotionally deaf, and every time we meet her subtlety with logic, her symbolism with solutions, her vulnerability with discomfort, we lose something sacred, something ancient, because at its core, her indirectness isn't manipulation. It's a defense, a way to preserve dignity in a world that has often punished her for being direct. But if we want to understand her, not just decode her, we have to go deeper. And that's where we're heading next. When men fail to recognize how women communicate, the consequences don't erupt like an explosion. They settle in like fog, quiet, persistent, and disorienting. You don't notice it at first. A missed cue here, an awkward silence there, a shrug, a sigh, a delayed response. Then slowly, her voice begins to fade. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer believes it will be heard. This is the unseen erosion of intimacy. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 micro misunderstandings. And here's the painful irony. The more she speaks through emotional implication, the more he craves clarity. The more he responds with blunt logic, the more she retreats into nuance. What began as attraction devolves into tension, and eventually into silence. When she expresses dissatisfaction not through complaint, but through mood, and he misreads it as withdrawal or irrationality. These are not small missteps. They're emotional landmines, and over time, they detonate. The worst part, neither side intends harm. She's not trying to confuse. He's not trying to dismiss. But intention doesn't protect you from impact. This invisible rift has real consequences. Men begin to feel punished for not getting it. They withdraw, grow defensive, or worse, decide that emotionality is illogical, unstable, or manipulative. They build walls of reason to protect themselves from what they don't understand. Meanwhile, women grow resentful, not just for being misunderstood, but for being emotionally alone in a relationship that looks connected on the outside. Neurologically, men and women process communication differently. Research shows that women tend to activate both hemispheres of the brain when interpreting emotional tone and meaning. Men, by contrast, more commonly isolate processing to one hemisphere, favoring logic, structure, and problem solving. This isn't a flaw, it's a difference. But left unchecked, it becomes a barrier. Because what often sounds to her like emotional resonance sounds to him like confusion. And what feels to him like honesty feels to her like emotional insensitivity. This difference, though subtle, manifests everywhere. When she says, "I feel like you're not present," and he replies, "I'm sitting right here." When she asks, "Do you even care?" and he responds, "Of course I care. Why would I be here if I didn't?" They stop sharing, stop expressing. Sometimes they even stop caring. And this isn't just about romantic relationships. This same pattern plays out between fathers and daughters, coworkers, teachers and students. Anywhere a woman hopes to be felt, and a man has never been taught how to feel with her. And here's where it gets existential. Every time a man fails to listen beyond the words, he misses a chance to expand his own emotional intelligence. He loses touch, not just with her, but with the full range of his own humanity. Because indirect communication is not a female flaw to be decoded. It is a doorway into emotional reality, a realm where meanings breathe beneath the surface, where truth is clothed in tone, gesture, timing, silence, a realm where life speaks not in bullet points, but in poetry. But we've been trained to ignore this realm, to reduce emotion to noise, to silence the unsaid. And so we remain strangers, not just to women, but to something within ourselves. But it doesn't have to stay that way. There's another path if we dare to take it. Let's be honest. Most men don't know how to read between the lines. Not because they're dumb, not because they don't care, but because they were never taught that listening is an act of translation. To understand a woman is not to decode her. It is to tune in to a frequency that runs through emotion, atmosphere, energy. And so the rebellion begins with attention, real attention, not the kind that waits to respond, but the kind that dares to feel. You see, most of us were trained to hear for content. She says something, we search for the bullet point. What does she want? But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what is she trying to feel safe enough to express? Sometimes, the message is, I want you to understand what hurts me. I want you to notice what I can't say. I want you to care enough to stay present when I'm scared to be direct. That's not manipulation. That's emotional risk management. And when a man starts to listen with emotional curiosity, not just logic, everything changes. Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. To listen to a woman deeply is to awaken your own emotional dimension, the one men are often taught to suppress. So how do we break free from this disconnect? It begins with dropping the performance. You don't need to be the fixer. You don't need to have the perfect words. You just need to be present without trying to solve her. That's the paradox. She's not always looking for an answer. She's looking to see if you're willing to feel the weight of her experience with her. This requires a new kind of masculinity, one that isn't afraid of emotional chaos, but stands calmly inside of it without running. It's what I call emotional fluency. Not reacting when you're confused, not shutting down when she's angry, not dismissing her subtle cues because you wish she were more like you. It's sitting in the unknown with her, knowing that understanding doesn't always arrive in the first sentence or the third. It's asking, what are you not saying that you wish I understood? Help me know what this really means to you. How can I make you feel safer to be honest? Because when she feels emotionally held, she becomes more direct, not less. When she trusts you can handle her complexity, she doesn't need to mask it. And here's the reward. When you truly hear her, she transforms, not into someone easier, but into someone real. That's the moment when love deepens, when connection becomes art, when communication stops being a battlefield and becomes a bridge. And not just with her, but with every woman who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or misunderstood. The rebellion is not about dominating the emotional conversation. It's about dissolving the idea that logic and feeling are enemies. They're not. They are lovers who've been estranged for too long. And the man who reunites them, who listens with his mind and his heart, becomes the rarest kind of man. Not a fixer, not a savior, but a witness, a mirror, a safe place, a man who finally understands. She was never speaking in code. She was just waiting for you to become fluent in her language. In the end, it all comes down to one painful, beautiful, inescapable truth. She was never trying to confuse you. She was trying to protect the most vulnerable part of herself from a world that too often tells women to be agreeable, palatable, and small. And what we men interpreted as indirectness, vagueness, or emotional chaos was her courage to speak in a language we were never taught to hear. You see, most women are fluent in two emotional languages, theirs and ours. They've had to be. They grow up learning to read micro-expressions, to anticipate discomfort, to sense moods, to diffuse tension before it erupts. They adapt. They translate. But most men were never expected to do the same. We were told, just say it, be logical, don't make things complicated. So we did. And somewhere along the way, we lost the ability to listen without rushing to fix, to stand still in discomfort, to feel without analyzing. But here's the final, most powerful realization. Her indirectness is not a test. It's a threshold into the hidden dimension of connection, where language becomes layered, where truth is emotional, where love speaks through silence and presence, not just through clarity. Most men stand at this threshold and retreat. They complain she's too complicated, or worse, accuse her of being manipulative or crazy. But the man who dares to cross it, who sits with her tone instead of just her words, who feels her fear instead of correcting her logic, who listens when there's nothing obvious to respond to, he touches something sacred. He begins to see her, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a universe to explore. And in doing so, he finds a forgotten part of himself, the anima, the mirror of his own emotional wholeness. Because when you learn to hear her language, you begin to speak the lost language of your own soul. You no longer fear feeling. You no longer rush to control what is not linear. You begin to hold space, not dominate it. And in that space, a woman will say more with her eyes than most people do in a lifetime. She'll invite you to see the world through metaphor, intuition, rhythm. She'll show you that what is unspoken is often more truthful than what is said. And suddenly, you'll realize she was never hiding from you. She was just waiting to feel safe enough to stop hiding from herself. So what does it take? Not intelligence, no experience, not even romantic skill. Just this, the willingness to feel with her, to slow down, to stay open, even when it doesn't make immediate sense. That's the bridge. That's the translation. That's the moment when understanding isn't just possible, it's inevitable. So the next time she says, "It's fine," pause. Don't fix. Don't retreat. Just feel. Because buried in that pause is everything she never learned how to say and everything you were never taught how to hear. But now you know. And the man who listens without needing to be right, who hears what's buried beneath the surface, who respects the indirect as an ancient language of survival, intuition, and soul, he becomes something rare. Not just a partner, but a translator of the unspoken. And that, my friend, is how you finally stop misunderstanding women and start understanding yourself.